Hello again. I am very much against war, which is a dreadful business. I am, however, also aware that this activity is, and indeed has been since the dawn of recorded history, enormously popular, and that there is no sign of any decline in enthusiasm for countries attacking each other. Quite the opposite, in fact. War seems to be enjoying something of a boom in recent years. The British have been every bit as keen as any other nation on waging war, not only with its immediate neighbours, but almost anywhere in the world that you care to mention. Of course, one disadvantage of war is that people do tend to be killed when this activity is engaged in. Indeed, the death of both soldiers and civilians is something of a defining mark of war. It is what happens. Britain has historically accepted this and simply got on with fighting wars and winning them by any means which seemed necessary and appropriate. But we in this country are now urging Israel to stop carrying on like that and to follow a new set of rules to which it seems all combatants should now adhere. These include making sure that you supply an enemy nation with electricity and water, and not conducting bombing raids if there is a risk of civilian casualties. This is an almost surreal vision of warfare, and I cannot help but wonder when the British became so delicate and sanctimonious about the business. Let's try and imagine how things might have been during the Second World War if the British had played by these rules at that time. First is that business about not interfering with the supply of water to the nation with whom you are at war. Does anybody remember the dam busters? There were a number of reservoirs in Germany in 1943 which supplied water to industry and also, of course, drinking water. We thought that disrupting the supply of drinking water to the civilian population, as well as crippling those steelworks and so on, would be a really good idea. So, of course, we launched a mission to destroy the dams which form those reservoirs by the means of the bouncing bomb. Can you imagine cutting off the supply of water to those living in a country we were at war with? That's a war crime, right? The floods alone, which resulted from the breaching of the dams in 1943, killed over 1,000 people, and we still celebrate that achievement to this day, with not a hint of shame or remorse. Fast forward a few years, and when Israel chooses to stop supplying water to a country with whom they are at war by simply operating a stopcock, there is widespread outrage, not least in this country. It seems that the new and humane rules of warfare mean that one is obliged to supply the enemy with water from your own system, and that declining to keep giving them your water is an act of barbarism. Does this really mean that during the Second World War we should have been supplying the Third Reich with electricity and water at no cost to them? Is it just me, or does that sound a bit weird? Then there's the question of bombing another country. We did quite a bit of that when we were trying to defeat Hitler, of course, but it seems that this too is considered out of court these days. Instead, we should have ensured that we did not bomb any military target which might have been near civilians. Tricky that one when the enemy has all kinds of assets in and about cities. Of course, it might be argued Gaza is not an independent country in the way that Germany was. Except, of course, that that is exactly what it is. The people in the Gaza Strip fought a war, the Intifada or uprising, to force Israel to withdraw from that territory and allow them to govern themselves. In the elections held a little while after the Israeli withdrawal, Hamas gained more seats than any other group, and they've been the official government of Gaza now for 16 years. Hamas actually are the government, and they also form the army of the Gaza Strip. Mind, that brings us to another interesting point. When we were fighting the Second World War, there were very strict rules that soldiers had to wear uniforms to distinguish them from civilians. Soldiers who were caught in civilian clothes in enemy territory were liable to be executed. The Germans shot British soldiers for that, and we shot German soldiers whom we caught in civilian clothes on our territory. In 1941, a sergeant in the German army called Joseph Jacobs parachuted into England in civilian clothes and, as a result, became the last person ever to be executed by a firing squad in the Tower of London. The soldiers of Hamas, though, do not wear uniforms. They conduct military operations in civilian clothing, and this inevitably means that any army fighting them cannot tell who is an enemy combatant and who a civilian. This leads inevitably to unnecessary civilian deaths. It's interesting to judge the actions of our own armed forces in this way, using the standards now applied by modern young liberals and left-wingers as they relate to the Israeli army.